Hello. My reflection for you this week comes from the Gospel of John, chapter 1 and verse 14. At this time of year, we are often reminded of this word incarnation. We're told about the incarnation. And that word incarnation comes from the Latin translation of this verse, that the Word became flesh. The incarnation doesn't mean that a man somehow became God. What it means is that the eternal Son of God came into the world as a man. Still 100% divine, but also 100% human. I'll read to you what John writes in John 1:14. He writes that the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. Every year at this time, we pause to remember Jesus entering into the world as a baby. But this verse here, John chapter 1, verse 14, is more than a few words to remind us of the incarnation at Christmas. These words really are foundational in our faith because they're powerful. And they reveal some incredible truths about Jesus. In this verse, we can clearly see that Jesus is introduced to us as the Word, right? The Word, coexistent with God from before creation. He's always been there. And so when you read these words, you find that there's so much packed into just this one little verse that teach us about Jesus. But what I want to do in this reflection is I want you to see how the words to this verse can apply to our lives. Not some of the words, all of the words. The verse opens with words really that changed the course of human history. John writes that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. That Jesus is God in the flesh and that he came to dwell among his people. The incarnation really is the most wonderful truth in all history. And when you begin to consider it and you begin to reflect on it, the implications are sweeping. Because the incarnation tells us that God desires to communicate himself to us. And because of our limitations, he was only able to do that by speaking at our level and becoming one of us. The incarnation tells us that God truly understands our nature. He understands our suffering. The incarnation tells us of the seriousness of sin because Jesus died to free us from the bondage of sin. The incarnation tells us of God's love for humanity, that he is involved in the human story. In fact, he's a major player because the incarnation tells us that the bridge between divinity and humanity is crossable. And so we can have this hope of relationship with God, having the presence of God right here, right now. God became flesh and walked among us. God is with his people. John goes on to say that we have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son. And so John tells us that God's presence was made visible by the living Word. And because of that, God's glory could be seen through him. God's glory could be seen in his Son, Jesus. What's so incredible about the Word becoming flesh is that now we too can see and experience God's glory. You see, faith opens the door to Jesus. And so we can know him, we can have relationship with God, Father, Son, and Spirit. Because John tells us what Jesus is all about, that he came from the Father, full of grace and truth. Jesus came to show us grace, and he came to show us truth, to set us free from everything that holds us back, to set us free from everything that does not measure up to who God says we are, to free us from sin. And so the incarnation of Jesus coming to this world is the greatest expression of what it looks like to experience God's grace and understand God's truth. And when you look at the life of Jesus, you see how that plays out. So John chapter 1 verse 14 really is a very fitting verse for Christmas. Because every Christmas we remember Jesus coming to this earth and dwelling amongst us. But this shouldn't be a verse that we only think about once a year. No, we really should think about these words more often, because they are a foundational truth. Those words are something that we can build our faith around, because the verse shows us that God is not a distant God, that He's a personal God. Those words show us that God has a vested interest in you, that He came to this earth to show you grace and truth, and that He wants you to know Him, to know that He is closer than close. And because of what Jesus has done, that you too can experience a life that is set apart in experiencing the glory of God. Can I encourage you to remind yourself of 4 little words this Christmas? And these are the 4 words. God is with me. God is with me. God is with me. Maybe you take a post-it note and write those words down and stick them somewhere you can see them, maybe in the cover of your Bible or on your computer screen or somewhere. Because if you let those words sink into your heart, maybe take your phone and set them as a reminder on your phone, because those words, that God is with me, if those words sink into your spirit, if they sink into your mind, it'll encourage you to keep your eyes on Jesus. God is with me. My prayer for you this Christmas time is that you would experience the blessing of God, knowing that He is with you as you walk through whatever is in front of you. God is with you. God is with me. May you be blessed.